by all means, go ahead and ask your questions. Trapper, what's going on, honey? These are just so cute to me. I am. What's going on, honey? Fragilities. Thank you for being a fan, sugar. By all means, feel free to ask your questions. True Flipper, what's going on? Wait, what? Um, start moking, I think. That's what it says. What's going on, honey? Chocolate tea, welcome, sugar. And by all means, ask your questions. Well, that's a ridiculous thing to change, but whatever. All right, Chocolate Tea, didn't you say you were going to put up pictures of Medusa? Is this the baby? Swear I hate big girls sometimes. They'll never let you sit here and see shit when you want to see it. Mm-hmm. More than one way to skin a cat. Look at how little booze yourself. With her collar and everything. Blame it on Quay is alive right now. Boosie, what's going on, honey? what's going on? Dre, what's going on? Or Dre Day. Dre Day. Yeah, Dre Day. That's right. Was he actually having a stroke? Now he know he wrong as hell. Nguyen Sang, what's going on, honey? Damn right. Boss man chill, what's going on? I thought this I thought this was fake. This motherfucker said to take this man to the fucking seat. You know the wild part about Big O is ever since I put my price list up on how much I charge my prices, y'all been quiet as shit. But when it was just saying, hey, live readings, people were coming in. Pretty B, what's going on? Marvin Dez, what's going on? I really want this dry this dish drying rack. Anyway, but yeah, that's been an interesting little thing that I've noticed with Big O. Before I put that price list up as the profile picture, people would come in here and ask their questions. Now that there's an actual price list up, people don't want to come in no more. So that's telling me that either people really only want shit for free, or people really don't know math. You would rather spend seven something dollars to purchase a reading that's $5? Okay, you must got money like that. John for you, Janelle. I mean, people on Big O really don't think much. My and Rod, what's going on? Janelle. Ten of Pentacles is inverted. This is you chasing fool's gold. That's just what it is. You chasing fool's gold. You are looking for this treasure map to lead you to, a fucking pirate's chest full of gold, and that's not what this is. I mean, you're not paying attention to the map. You're not looking at it. You're not really seeing even if that map applies to the situation or applies to the area that you're in. Mm-mm. That map is either bad. I mean, pretty much if you follow it, either it's gonna be a wild goose chase or someone else already got their treasure a long time ago. Two of Swords is inverted. You have a couple of paths you could take, and you're choosing not to. This is also the equivalent of someone telling you what the truth is. Someone giving you the playbook, someone giving you the blueprint, and you choosing to ignore it. And in the end, as you ignore it, you choose to bitch and complain about shit not going the way it should have been when you did things your way, instead of just going by the book that's already there. Hustler, what's going on? Positive vibes. CC, what's going on? Hey, CC. Meskis got on boots. Queen of Pentacles is inverted. Queen of Pentacles being inverted means you emotionally spin. You get beside yourself, and then you don't feed into anything that will help you prosper or help you go to the next level. You just being stubborn, being hard headed as hell. Keenan, what's going on, honey? Tali, welcome, honey. Ice, brown sugar, oat milk, espresso. Mm-mm. That's too many no's. That's too many no's. Why is some of this shit a thing? Mm-hmm. Dimps, welcome, honey. All around, what's going on, honey? And by all means, go ahead and ask your questions. by all means, when y'all are ready to ask your questions, go ahead. I forgot where y'all were in this book. Y'all just gonna have to start where I'm at. And when I say Stephen King is graphic, Tiff, what's going on? I said, oh, she had been some kind of fine looking, all right, with that dynamite body and that gorgeous fall of red wavy hair. But she was weak. Weak somehow. It was as if she was sending out radio signals which only he could receive. You could point to certain things, how much she smoked, but he had almost cured her of that. The restless way her eyes moved, never quite meeting the eyes of whomever was talking to her. Only touching them from time to time and then leaping nimbly away. Her habit of lightly rubbing her elbows when she was nervous. Crystals, what's going on, sugar? By all means, y'all ask your questions because as I am reading, I am still reading. Her habit of lightly rubbing her elbows when she was nervous, the look of her fingernails, which were kept neat but were brutally short. Tom noticed this latter the first time he met her. She picked up her glass of white wine. He saw her nails and thought, she keeps them short like that because she bites them. What's going on, honey? How are you? Lions may not think, at least not the way people think, but they see. And when antelopes start away from a watering hole, alerted by that dusty rug scent of approaching death, the cats can observe which one falls to the rear of the pack. Maybe because it has a lame leg. Maybe because it's just naturally slower. Or maybe because its sense of danger is less developed. And it might even be possible that some antelopes and some women want to be brought down. Suddenly he heard a sound that jerked him rudely out of his memories. The snap of her cigarette lighter. The dull rage came again, his stomach filled with the heat which was not entirely unpleasant. Smoking. She was smoking. They had a few of Tom Rogan's special seminars on the subject. And here she was, doing it again. She was a slow learner, all right, but a good teacher is at his best with slow learners. Yes, she said. Uh-huh. All right. Yes. She listened, then uttered a strange, jagged laugh that he had never heard before. Two things, since you ask. Reserve me a room and save me a prayer. Yes, okay. Uh-huh. Me too. Good night. She was hanging up as he came in. He meant to come in hard, yelling at her to put it out. Put it out right now! Right now! But when he saw her, the words died in his throat. He had never seen her like this before, but only 2 or 3 times. Once before their first big show, once before the first private preview showing for national buyers, and once when they had gone to New York for the International Design Awards. Good, baby, what's going on, honey? By all means, feel free to ask your questions. Zach, what's going on? Please do not call me dog. I do not like it. But how are you, honey? And by all means, ask your questions because as I am reading it, I'm still reading tarot. She was moving across the room in long strides, the white lace nightgown molded to her body, the cigarette clamped between her front teeth. God, he hated the way she looked with a bud in her mouth, sending back a little white ribbon. Ugh. Love Stephen King. Over her left shoulder with smoke, like smoke from a locomotive stack. But it was her face that really gave him pause, that caused the planned out shout to die in his throat. His heart lurched. Kabam! And he winced, telling himself that what he felt was not fear, but only surprise at finding her this way. She was a woman who really came alive all the way only when the rhythm of her work spiked toward a climax. Each of those remembered cases had, of course, been career related. At those times, he had seen a different woman from the one he knew so well. A woman who fucked up sensitive, sensitive fear radar with wild bursts of static. The woman who came out in times of stress was strong, but high strung, fearless, but unpredictable. There was lots of color in her cheeks now, a natural blush high on her cheekbones. Her eyes were wide and sparkly, not a trace of sleep left in them. Her hair flowed and screamed and, "Oh, looky here, friends and neighbors. Oh, you just looky right here." Is she taking out a suitcase from the closet? A suitcase? By God, she is. "Reserve me a room. Say me a prayer." Well, she wasn't going to need a room in any hotel, not in the foreseeable future, because little Beverly Rogan was going to be staying right here at home, thank you very much, and taking her meals standing up for the next 3 or 4 days. But she very well might need a prayer or two before he was through with her. "Yes, what's going on?" She tossed the suitcase on the front of the bed and then went to the bureau. She opened up the top drawer and pulled out 2 pairs of jeans and a pair of cords. Tossed them into the suitcase. Back to the bureau. Cigarette steaming smoke over her shoulder. She grabbed a sweater, a couple of t-shirts, one of the old shipping shore blouses that she looked so stupid in but refused to give up. Whoever had called her sure had been a jet setter. This was dull stuff. Strictly Jackie Kennedy high-end sport weekend stuff. Not that he cared about who had called her or where she thought she was going, since she wasn't going anywhere. Those were not the things which pecked steadily at his mind, dull and achy from too much beer and not enough sleep. It was that cigarette. Supposedly she had thrown them all out, but she had held out on him. The proof was clamped between her teeth right now. And because she still had not noticed him standing in the doorway, he allowed himself the pleasure of remembering the 2 nights which she had assured him of his complete control over her. "I don't want you to smoke around me anymore," he told her as they had headed home from a party in Lake Forest. October, that had been. "I have to choke that shit down at parties and at the office, but I don't have to choke it down when I'm with you. You know what it's like? I'm going to tell you the truth. It's unpleasant, but it's the truth. It's like having to eat someone else's snot." He thought this would bring some faint spark of protest, but she had only looked at him in her shy, wanting to please way. Her voice had been low and meek and obedient. "All right, Tom. Pitch it then." She pitched it. Sliding tea, what's going on?" Tom had been in a good humor for the rest of that night. A few weeks later, coming out of a movie, she unthinkingly lit a cigarette in the lobby and... Stop it. You see him at work. World, what's going on? She unthinkingly lit a cigarette in the lobby and puffed it as they walked across the parking lot to the car. It had been a bitter November night. Did I say world? World, what's going on? The wind chopping like a maniac at any exposed skin. Ugh. Any exposed square inch of flesh. I'm just rewriting this damn book. It could find. Tom remembered he had been able to smell the lake, as you sometimes could on cold nights. A flat smell that was both fishy and somehow empty. He let her smoke the cigarette. "Andrew, what's going on?" He even opened her door for her when they got to the car. He got in behind the wheel, closed his door, and then said, "Bev." She took the cigarette out of her mouth, turned toward him, inquiring, and he unloaded on her pretty good, his hard, open hand striking her across the cheek hard enough to make his palm tingle, hard enough to rock her head back against the headrest. Her eyes open, her eyes widened with surprise and pain, and something else as well. Hatshep said, "What's going on? A beauty, what's going on?" By all means, ask your questions. Her own hand flew to her cheek to investigate the warmth and tingling numbness there. She cried out, "Ow! Tom!" He looked at her, eyes narrow, mouth smiling casually, completely alive, ready to see what would come next, how she would react. His cock was stiffening in his pants, but he barely noticed. That was for later. For now, school was in session. He replayed what had just happened, her face. What had that third expression been there for a bare instant and then gone? First the surprise, then the pain, then the nostalgia. Look of a memory, of some memory. It had only been for a moment. He didn't think she even knew it had been there on her face or in her mind. Now, it would all be in the first. It would all be in the first thing she didn't say. He knew that as well as his own name. It wasn't, "You son of a bitch." It wasn't, "See you later, Macho City." It wasn't, "We're through, Tom." She only looked at him with her wounded, brimming hazel eyes and said, "Why did you do that?" Then she tried to say something else and burst into tears instead. "Throw it out." "What? What, Tom?" Her makeup was running down her face in muddy tracks. He didn't mind that. He kind of liked seeing her that way. It was messy, but there was something sexy about it too. Slutty. Kind of exciting. The cigarette. Throw it out. Realization dawning, and with it, guilt. "I just forgot," she cried. "That's all." "Throw it out, Bev, or you're going to get another shot." She rolled down the window and pitched the cigarette. Then she turned back to him, her face pale and scared and somehow serene. "You can't. You aren't supposed to hit me. That's a bad basis for a lasting relationship." She was trying to find a tone, an adult rhythm of speech, and failing. He had regressed her. He was in this car with a child. Voluptuous and sexy as hell, but a child. Can't and aren't are two different things. Did he call her Keed? I don't know if I'm gonna have to look that one up. What is this? They gotta be having so many damn pop-ups and stuff. He kept his voice calm, but inside he was jittering and jiving. "And I'll be the one to decide what constitutes a lasting relationship and what doesn't. If you can live with that, fine. If you can't, you can take a walk. I won't stop you. I might kick you once in the ass as a going away present, but I won't stop you. It's a free country. What more can I say?" "Maybe you've already said enough," she whispered, and he hit her again, harder than the first time, because no broad was ever gonna smart off to Tom Rogan. He would pop the Queen of England if she cracked smart to him. Her cheek banged the padded dashboard. Her hand groped for the door handle and then fell away. She only crouched in the corner like a frightened rabbit, one hand over her mouth, her eyes large and wet and frightened. Tom looked at her for a moment, then he got out and walked around to the back of the car. He opened the door. His breath was smoke in the black, windy November air, and the smell of the lake was very clear. "Want to get out, Bev? I saw you reaching for that door handle, so I guess you just want to get out." "Okay, that's all right. I asked you to do something you said you would. Then you didn't. So now you want to get out? Come on. Get out." "What the fuck, right? Get out. You want out?" "No," she whispered. "What? I can't hear you." "No, I don't want to get out," she said a little louder. "What? Those cigarettes give you emphysema? If you can't talk, I'll get you a fucking megaphone. This is your last chance, Beverly. You speak up so I can hear you. Do you want to get out of this car, or do you want to come back with me?" want to come back with you, she said, and clasped her hands on her skirt like a little girl. She wouldn't look at him. Tears slipped down her cheeks. All right, he said. Fine. But first you say this for me, Bev. You say, I forgot about smoking in front of you, Tom. Now she looked at him, her eyes wounded, pleading, inarticulate. You can make me do this, her eyes said, but please don't. Don't. I love you. Can't it be over? No, it could not. 208, what's going on? Because that was not the bottom of her warning, and both of them knew it. Say it. I forgot about smoking in front of you, Tom. Good. Now say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, she repeated dully. The cigarette lay smoking on the pavement like a cut piece of fuse. People leaving the theater glanced at them. The man standing by the open passenger door of the late model fade into the woodwork Vega. The woman sitting inside, her hands clasped primly in her lap, her head down. The dome light outlined the soft fall of her hair in gold. He crushed the cigarette out. He smeared it against the blacktop. Now say, I'll never do it again without your permission. I'll never. Her voice began to hitch. Never. Say it, Bev. Never do it again without your permission. So he slammed the door and gone back around to the driver's seat. He got behind the wheel and drove them back to his downtown apartment. Neither of them said a word. Half the relationship had been set in the parking lot. The second half was set 45 minutes later in Tom's bed. She didn't want to make love, she said. He saw a different truth in her eyes and the strutting cock of her legs. However, and when he got her blouse off, her nipples had been rock hard. She moaned when he brushed them and cried out softly when he suckled first on one and then the other. 208, thank you, honey. Kneaded them restlessly as he did so. She grabbed his hand and thrust it between her legs. I thought you didn't want to, he said, and she had turned her face away. But she did not let go of his hand, and the rocking motion of her hips actually speeded up. He pushed her back on the bed, and now he was gentle, not ripping her underwear, but removing it with careful consideration that was almost prissy. Sliding into her was like sliding into some exquisite oil. He moved with her, using her, but let her use him as well. And she came the first time almost at once, crying out and digging her nails into his back. Then they rocked together in long, slow strokes, and somewhere in there, he thought she came again. Tom would get close, and then he would think of White Sox batting averages, or who was trying to undercut him from the Chesley account at work, and he would be okay again. Then she began to speed up, her rhythm finally dissolving into an excited bucking. He looked at her face, the raccoon ringlets of mascara, the smeared lipstick, and he felt himself suddenly shooting deliriously toward the edge. She jerked her hips up harder and harder. There had been no beer gut between them in those days, and their bellies clapped hands in a quickening beat. Near the end, she screamed and then bit his shoulder with her small, even teeth. How many times did you come? He asked her after they had showered. She turned her face away, and when she spoke, her voice was so low he almost couldn't hear her. That isn't something you're supposed to ask. No? Who told you that? Mr. Rogers? He took her face in one hand, thumb pressed deeply into one cheek, fingers pressing into the other, palm cupping her chin in between. You talk to Tom, he said. You hear me, Belle? Talk to Papa. 3, she said reluctantly. Good, he said. You can have a cigarette. She looked at him distrustfully. Her red hair spread over the pillows, wearing nothing but a pair of hip-hugger panties. Just looking at her that way got his motor turning over again. He nodded. Go on, he said. That's all right. They had been married in a civil ceremony 3 months later. 2 of his friends had come. The only friend of hers to attend had been Kay McCall, who Tom called that titsy women's lib bitch. All of these memories went through Tom's mind in the space of seconds, like a speeded up piece of film as he stood in the doorway watching her. She had gone on to the bottom drawer of what she sometimes called her weekend bureau. And now she was tossing underwear into the suitcase, Not the sort of stuff he liked. The slippery satins and smooth silks. This was cotton stuff. Little girl stuff. Most of it faded and with little white puffs of popped out elastic and on the waistbands. A cotton nightie that looked like something out of Little House on the Prairie. She poked in the back of this bottom drawer to see what else might be lurking in there. Tom Rogan, meanwhile, moved across the shag rug toward his wardrobe. His feet were bare and his passage noiseless as a puff of breeze. It was the cigarette. That was what had really gotten him mad. It had been a long time since she had forgotten that first lesson. There had been other lessons to learn since, a great many. And there had been hot days when she had worn long sleeve blouses or even cardigan sweaters buttoned all the way to the neck. Gray days when she had worn sunglasses. But that was the first lesson. That first lesson had been so sudden and fundamental. He had forgotten the telephone call that had awakened him out of his deepening sleep. It was the cigarette. Key, what's going on? If she was smoking now, then she had forgotten Tom Rogan. Temporarily, of course. Esteban, what's going on? Only temporarily. But even temporarily was too damn long. What might have caused her to forget didn't matter. Such things were not to happen in this house for any reason. TJ, Lady T, welcome, honey. By all means, ask your questions. Just understand that those who pay for their readers get pushed to the front of the line. There was a wide black strip of leather hanging from a hook inside the closet door. There was no buckle on it. He had removed that long ago. It was double over at one end where a buckle would have gone. And this double over section formed a loop into which Tom Rogan slipped his hand. Tom, you've been bad, his mother had said sometimes. Well, sometimes was maybe not such a good word. Maybe often would have been better. You come here, Tommy. I gotta give you a whooping. His life as a child had been punctuated by whoopings. He had finally escaped to I can never say this word, Wichita State College. But apparently there was no such thing as a complete escape, because he continued to hear her voice in his dreams. Come here, Tommy. I gotta give you a whooping. 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 He had been the eldest of 4. 3 months after the youngest had been born, Ralph Rogan had died. Well, died may not have been such a good word. Maybe committed suicide would have been a better way to put it, since he had poured a generous quantity of lye into a tumbler of gin and quaffed this new devil brew while sitting on the bathroom hopper. Y'all know how back in the day they used to call it toilet hopper. Just lets you know how dated some of these terms are. Mrs. Rogan had found work at the Ford plant. Tom, although only 11, became the man of the family. And if he screwed it up, if the baby Shad'Oitis after the sitter went home and the mess was still in them when Mom got home, if he forgot to cross Megan on the Broad Street corner after her nursery school got out and that nosy Mrs. Gant saw, if he happened to be watching American Bandstand while Joey made a mess in the kitchen, if any of those things or 1,000 others happened, then after the smaller children were in bed, the spanking stick would come out and she would give that call of invocation. Come here, Tommy. I gotta give you a whooping. Better to be the whooper than the whooped. So this is a case of hurt people hurt people. This is why some people say a kid's childhood fucks them up. And this is why some people say, "Oh, you don't have to whoop the child. You can be." No, this is not whooping. Okay. Ipe, Dangerous, what's going on? Alexander, what's going on? What she's doing is not whooping. This is abuse. This is beating. Because he's saying for anything he would get beat. That's not disciplining the child. That's instilling fear. This is why hurt people, and this is why everyone takes it back to people's childhood. A lot of people's morals and fundamentals get fucked up from kids. Like from being kids and from parents who don't know no better. If he had learned nothing else on the great toll road of life, he had learned that. So he flipped the loose end of the belt over once and pulled the loop snug. Then he closed his fist over it. It felt good. It made him feel like a grown up. The strip of leather hung from his clenched fist like a dead black snake. His headache was gone. Again, when you beat a kid, you take away their power. So when they become an adult, they want to get that power back, and then they start abusing other people. That's his end. On her end, she had been beaten. This is why they're like, people tend to look for their parents and shit like that. She found a man exactly like her father and looked at him and repeated the cycle. If she was, stop it, if she was abused as a kid, which we haven't gotten that far, but we can just ascertain from her reactions that that's what happens. He even says that she reverts back into childhood. When she got hit, she immediately became a kid again, because this is where everything started. This is what happened. He went into the opposite of childhood, as in, I need to be the strong one. I need to be in control, because I had no control when I was a kid. I wasn't the one calling the shots. If I disobeyed, I got beat. So this becomes something that he lacked, and then as he grew up, this is what he decided he was going to beat into people. These are those red flags you need to look for, because he even says he didn't know what it was about her, but she felt weak to him the first time he saw her. First thing he saw was her nails were short. And he said she kept them that way because he ascertained that she liked to bite them. That there were little things about her that he just knew. She's easy. This is why I tell people to be careful about who you date. You may not know it, you may not see it, you may not realize it. But there are little telltale things, little telltale marks, little things that you do here and there that tell on you. Whether you had an abused childhood, whether you had trauma, whatever it is that is deeply rooted in you that you don't even realize that you tried to bury, comes out whether you want it to or not. And people like him who were prey and became predator recognizes that. It's like hurt people recognizing hurt people. He saw that in her long before she even knew that's what she was doing. When she's nervous, she scratches her elbow. When she does this, she does that. He was already picking this up. This is actually what like con artists do. This is a pattern with people of a certain caliber. So, she's weak. She's abused. She's never dealt with the trauma. She's never done the shadow work. So, she becomes easy prey. Don't be easy prey. If you can avoid being easy prey, just do your shadow work. It's hard. It's going to hurt. It's going to take a while. But I promise you, would you rather spend 5 years doing shadow work and working through it, finally coming to peace with it, getting over it, and letting that make you stronger, or ignoring it and spend 20 and 30 years in a bad relationship? This is why this shit is important. But I digress. She had found that one last thing in the back of the drawer. An old white cotton bra with gun shell cuffs. The thought that this early morning call might have been from a lover surfaced briefly in his mind and then sank again. That was ridiculous. A woman going away to meet her lover did not pack her faded shipping shore blouses and her cotton Kmart undies with the pops and snarls in the elastic. Also, she wouldn't dare. Beverly, he called softly, and she turned at once, startled, her eyes widened, her long hair swinging. The belt hesitated, drooped a little. A lot of things they're saying, he's not just painting imagery, he's showing you that there are parts of him that really don't want to do this, but there are parts of him The part that is so used to being the weak one, the one that used to get beat on, that's the part that wants to beat her because he wants to feel strong. The part of him that was the child that was constantly beat does not want to do it. So that's the part that's letting it go. He stared at her, feeling that little bloom of uneasiness again. This is the kid. Yes, she had looked this way before the big shows, and then he hadn't gotten in her way. I understand that she was so filled with a mixture of fear and competitive aggressiveness that it was as if her head was full of illuminating gas. A single spark and she would explode. She had seen the shows not as a chance to split off from Delia Fashions to make a living or even a fortune on her own. If that had been all, she would have been fine. But if that were all, she also would not have been so ungodly talented. This is another thing they're pointing out. Every one of these kids had talents that were ridiculous. They never lost. All the kids in it, once they left Dairy, they were ridiculously good. They keep pointing that out, like, why are they so good at shit? She had seen those shows as a kind of super exam on which she would be graded by fierce teachers. What she saw on those occasions was some creature without a face. It had no face, but it did have a name: authority. All of that wide-eyed nerviness, he literally says nerviness, not nervousness. Nerviness was on her face now, but not just there, it was all around her. An aura that seemed almost visible, a high-tension charge which made her suddenly both more alluring and more dangerous than she'd ever been to him in years. Maya, what's going on? He was afraid because she was here, all here. The essential she, as apart from the she that Tom Rogan wanted her to be, the she he had made. By all means, ask your questions. Like I said, those who pay for their questions get pushed to the front of the line. Beverly looked shocked and frightened. She also looked almost madly exhilarated. Her cheeks glowed with hectic color, yet there were stark white patches below her lower eyelids which looked almost like a second pair of eyes. Her forehead glowed with a creamy resonance, and the cigarette was still jutting out of her mouth, now at a slightly up angle, as if she thought she was a goddamn Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The cigarette! Just looking at it caused dull fury to wash over him again in a green wave. Faintly, far in back of his mind, he remembered her saying something to him one night out of the dark, speaking in a dull, listless voice. Someday you're gonna kill me, Tom. Do you know that? Someday you're just gonna go too far, and that will be the end. You'll snap. He had answered, You do it my way, Bev, and that day will never come. Now, before the rage blotted out everything, he wondered if the day hadn't come after all. The cigarette, never mind the call, the packing, the weird look on her face. They would deal with the cigarette. Then he would fuck her. Then they would discuss the rest. By then, it might even seem unimportant. Oh, it might seem important. My bad. I forgot this is Tom we're talking about. Tom, she said. Tom, I have to. You're smoking, he said. His voice seemed to come from a distance, as if over pretty good radio. Looks like you forgot, babe. Where you been hiding them? Look, I'll put it out, she said, and went to the bathroom door. She flipped the cigarette. Even from here, he could see the teeth marks driven deep into the filter, into the bowl of the John. She came back out. Tom, that was an old friend. An old friend. I have to shut up. That's not what you have to do, he shouted at her. Just shut up. But the fear he wanted to see, the fear of him, was not on her face. There was fear, but it had come out of the phone. And fear was not supposed to come to Beverly from that direction. It was almost as if she didn't see the belt, didn't see him, and Tom felt a trickle of unease. Was he here? It was a stupid question, but was he? This question was so terrible and so elemental that for a moment he felt in danger of coming completely unwrapped. What the hell was it? Okay. From the root of himself and just floating off like a tumbleweed in the high breeze. Then he caught hold of himself. He was here, alright. And that was quite enough fucking psychobabble for one night. He was here. He was Tom Rogan. Tom by God Rogan. And if this dippy cunt didn't straighten up and fly right in the next 30 seconds or so, she was gonna look like she got pushed out of a fast moving boxcar by a mean railroad dick. Gotta give you a whooping, he said. Sorry about that, babe. He had seen that mixture of fear and aggressiveness before, yes. Now, for the first time ever, it flashed out of him. It flashed out at him. Put that thing down, she said. I have to get out to O'Hare as fast as I can. Are you here, Tom? Are you? He pushed the thought away. The strip of leather which had once been a belt swung slowly before him like a pendulum. His eyes flickered and then held fast to her face. Listen to me, Tom. There's been some trouble back in my hometown. Very bad trouble. I had a friend in those days. I guess he would have been my boyfriend, except we weren't quite old enough for that. He was only an 11-year-old kid with a bad stutter back then. He's a novelist now. You even read one of his books, I think. The Black Rapids? She searched his face, but his face gave no sign. There was only the belt penduluming back and forth. Back and forth. He stood with his head lowered and his stocky legs slightly apart. Then she ran her hand restlessly through her hair, distractedly, as if she had many important things to think of and hadn't seen the belt at all. And that haunting, awful question resurfaced in his head again. Are you there? Are you sure? That book laid around here for weeks, and I never made the connection. Maybe I should have, but we're all older, and I haven't even thought about Derry in a long, long time. Anyway, Bill had a brother George, and George was killed before I really knew Bill. He was murdered. And then the next summer, but Tom had listened to enough craziness from within and from without. He moved in on her fast, cocking his right arm back over his shoulder like a man about to throw a javelin. The belt hissed as it passed through the air. Beverly saw it coming and tried to duck away, but her right shoulder struck the bathroom doorway, and there was a meaty whack as the belt struck her left forearm, leaving a red wheal. Didn't say whelp, he said wheel. Okay. Gonna whoop you, Tom repeated. Jay, what's going on? His voice was sane, even regretful, but his teeth showed in a white, frozen smile. He wanted to see that look in her eyes, that look of fear and terror and shame, that look that said, yes, you're right, I deserved it. That look that said, yes, you're there all right, I feel your presence. Then love could come back, and that was right and good because he did love her. This is that shit that pisses me off about a lot of these type of people. They don't know how to effectively give love because they never received it correctly. So people always wonder how people can whoop on someone and beat somebody's ass and be like, I love them. That's because they weren't properly programmed as a child. Blue Ocean, what's going on? This is how people get confused. This is how hurt people hurt people. He doesn't know love the correct way because he didn't receive it as a kid. Therefore, he grew up as a man who, one, wanted to ascertain his level of, I'm in charge. But he can't do that with a strong woman. He has to do it with a broken and weak woman. Now he has this broken and weak woman who's not so broken and who's not so weak. She just, her gut reaction, her knee-jerk reaction to a situation is to revert to being a kid. But they can eventually fight back. He does actually love her, but he was never told how to show love without beating somebody's ass. So this is why I say just be careful of how you raise people. They could even have a discussion, if she wanted it, of exactly who had called and what this was all about. But that must come later. See how he's making the establishment that I have to hit her. I have to beat her. I have to make her submit. And then I can do this part. This is where the connection is fucked up. For now, school was in session. The old 1-2. House party was going on. First the whooping, then the fucking. Sorry, babe. Tom, don't do the... He swung this belt sidearm and saw it lick around her hip. There was a satisfying snap as it finished on her buttock. And Jesus, she was grabbing at it. She was grabbing at the belt. For a moment, Tom Rogan was so astounded by this unexpected act of insubordination that he almost lost his Punisher. would have lost it except for the loop, which was tucked securely into his fist. He jerked it back. Hector, what's going on? Don't you ever try to grab something away from me, he said hoarsely. You hear me? You ever do that again and you'll spend a month pissing raspberry juice. Tom, stop it, she said, and her very tone infuriated him. She sounded like a playground monitor talking down to a tantrumy 6-year-old. I have to go. This is no joke. People are dead, and I made a promise a long time ago. Tati, what's going on? Tom heard little of this. He bellowed and ran at her with his head down, the belt swinging blindly. He hit her with it, driving her away from the doorway and along the bedroom wall. He cocked his arm back, hit her, cocked his arm back, hit her, cocked his arm back, hit her. Later that morning, he would not be able to raise the arm above eye level until he had swallowed 3 codeine tablets. But for now, he was aware of nothing but the fact that she was defying him. DC, what's going on? She had not only been smoking, she had tried to grab the belt from him. And folks, friends and neighbors, she had asked for it. And he would testify before the throne of God Almighty that she was gonna get it. He drove her along the wall, swinging the belt, raining blows on her. Her hands were up to protect her face, but he had a clear shot at the rest of her. The belt had made thick bullwhip cracks in the quiet room. But she did not scream, as she sometimes did. And she did not beg him to stop, as she usually did. Worst of all, she did not cry, as she always did. The only sounds were the belt and their breathing, his heavy and hoarse, hers quick and light. She broke for the bed and the vanity table on the side of it. Her shoulders were red from belt blows. Her hair streamed fire. He lumbered after her, slower but big, very big. He had played squash until he had popped an Achilles tendon 2 years ago. And since then, his weight had gotten a little out of hand, maybe just a little bit. Or maybe a lot would have been the better way to put it. But the muscle was still there. Firm corded sheath in the fat. I told y'all I love the fact that he uses such words. Still, he was a little alarmed at how out of breath he was. She reached the vanity and he thought she would crouch there, or maybe try to crawl under it. Instead, she groped, turned, and suddenly the air was full of flying missiles. She was throwing cosmetics at him. A bottle of Chantilly struck him squarely between the nipples, fell to his feet, shattered. He was suddenly enveloped in the gagging scent of flowers. Quit it, he roared. Quit it, you bitch! Instead of quitting it, her hands flew along the vanity's littered glass top, grabbing whatever they found, throwing it. He groped at his chest where the bottle of Chantilly had struck him, unable to believe she had just hit him with something. Even as other objects flew around him, the bottle's glass stopper had cut him. It was not much of a cut, little more than a triangular scratch. But was there a certain red-haired lady who was going to see the sun come up from a hospital bed? Oh, yes, there was. A certain lady who a jar of cream struck him right above the right eyebrow with a sudden cracking force. He heard a dull thud seemingly inside his head. White light exploded over that eye's field of vision, and he fell back a step, mouth dropping open. Now a tube of Nivea cream, or Nivea. Nivea. It's Nivea. I remember this. Lioness, what's going on? Cream struck his belly with a small slapping sound. And she was she? Was it possible? Yes. She was yelling at him. I'm going to the airport, you son of a bitch. Do you hear me? I have a business and I'm going. You want to get out of my way because I'm going. Blood ran into his right eye, stinging and hot. He knuckled it away. He stood there for a moment, staring at her as if he had never seen her before. In a way, he never had. Her breast heaved rapidly, her face all flushed and livid pallor blazed. Her lips were drawn back from her teeth in a snarl. She had, however, denuded the top of the vanity. The missile silo was empty. He could still read the fear in her eyes, but it was still not fear of him. You put those clothes back, he said, struggling not to pant as he spoke. That would not sound good. That would sound weak. Then you put the suitcase back and get into bed. And if you do those things, maybe I won't beat you up too bad. Maybe you'll be able to go out the house in 2 days instead of 2 weeks. Tom, listen to me. She spoke slowly. Her gaze was very clear. If you come near me again, I'll kill you. Do you understand that, you tub of guts? I'll kill you. And suddenly, maybe it was because of the other loathing on her face, the contempt. Maybe because she had called him a tub of guts. Or maybe only because of the rebellious way her breast rose and fell. The fear was suffocating him. It was not a bud or a bloom, but a whole goddamn garden. The fear. The horrible fear that he was not here. Tom Rogan rushed at his wife, not bellowing this time. He came as sudden and silently as a torpedo cutting through the water. His intent now was probably not to merely beat and subjugate her, but to do to her what she had so rashly said she would do to him. He thought she would run, probably for the bathroom, maybe for the stairs. Instead, she stood her ground. Her hip whacked the wall as she threw her weight against the vanity table, pushing it up and toward him, ripping 2 fingernails down to the quick when the sweat on her palms caused her hands to slip. For a moment, the table tottered on an angle, and then she shoved herself forward again. The vanity waltzed on one leg, mirror catching the light and reflecting the brief swimming aquarium shadow across the ceiling. And then it tilted forward and outward. Its leading edge slammed into Tom's upper thighs and knocked him over. There was a musical jingle as bottles tipped over and shattered inside. He saw the mirror strike the floor on his left and threw up an arm to cover and shield his eyes, losing the belt. Glass coughed across the floor, silver on the back. He felt some of it sting him, drawing blood. These scorps, what's going on? 5 minutes, ask your questions. Now she was crying, her breath coming in high, screaming sobs. Time after time, she had seen herself leaving him, leaving Tom's tyranny as she had left that of her father, stealing away in the night, bags piled in the trunk of her cutlass. She was not a stupid woman, certainly not stupid enough even now, standing on the rim of this incredible shambles. What's going on, Sticks? How you doing, sugar? To believe that she had not loved Tom, and did not in some way love him still. But that did not preclude her fear of him, her hate of him, and her contempt of herself for choosing him for dim reasons buried in the times that should be over. Her heart was not breaking. It seemed rather to be boiling in her chest, melting. She was afraid the heat from her heart might soon destroy her sanity in fire. How you doing, sugar? And by all means, y'all ask your questions. I just keep telling y'all that those who pay for their questions get pushed to the front of the line. But above all this, yammering steadily in the back of her mind, she could hear Mike Hanlon's dry, steady voice. It's come back, Beverly. It's come back. And you promised. The vanity heaved up and down once, twice, a third time. It looked as if it were breathing. Moving with careful agility, her mouth turned down at the corners and jerking as if in prelude to some sort of convulsion. She skirted the vanity, toe-stepping through the broken glass, and grabbed the belt just as Tom heaved the vanity off to one side. Then she backed up, sliding her hand into the loop. She shook her hair out of her eyes and watched to see what he would do. Tom got up. Some of the mirror glass had cut one of his cheeks. A diagonal cut traced the line as fine as thread across his brow. He squinted at her as he rose slowly to his feet, and she saw drips of blood on his boxer shorts. "You just give me that belt," he said. Instead, she took 2 turns of it around her hand and looked at him defiantly. "Quit it, Bev, right now. If you come for me, I'm going to strap the shit out of you." The words were coming out of her mouth, but she couldn't believe it was her saying them. And just who was this caveman in the bloody undershorts anyway? Her husband? Her father? The lover she had taken in college who had broken her nose one night? Apparently on a whim? "Oh, God, help me," she thought. "God, help me now." And still her mouth went on. "I can do it, too. You're fat and slow, Tom. I'm going, and I think maybe I'll stay gone. I think maybe it's over. Who's this guy, Denbro? Forget it." She realized almost too late that the question had been a distraction. He was coming for her before the last word was out of her mouth. She wickered the belt through the air in an arc, and the sound it made when it smashed across his mouth was the sound of a stubborn cork coming out of a bottle. He squealed and clapped his hands to his mouth, his eyes huge, hurt and shocked. Blood began to pour between his fingers and over the backs of his hands. "You broke my mouth, you bitch!" he screamed muffled. "Ah, God, you broke my mouth!" Apparently she didn't break it enough because he could still scream. He came at her again, hands reaching, his mouth a wet red smear. His lips appeared to have burst in 2 places. The crown had been knocked from one of his front teeth. Who knew what's going on? As she watched, he spitted to one side. Part of her was backing away from the scene, sick and moaning, wanting to shut her eyes. But that other Beverly felt the exultation of a death row convict freed in a freak earthquake. That Beverly liked all of this just fine. "I wish you swallow it." That was one thought. Wish you choked on it. Hurt people hurt people. See? It was this latter Beverly who swung the belt for the last time. The belt he had used on her buttocks, her legs, her breasts. The belt he had used on her times without number over the last 4 years. How many strokes you got depending on how badly you'd screw up. Tom comes home and dinner is cold? 2 with the belt. Beverly's working late at the studio and forgets to call home? 3 with the belt. Oh, hey, look at this. Beverly got another parking ticket. 1 with the belt across the breast. He was good. He rarely bruised. It didn't even hurt that much, except for the humiliation. That hurt. And what hurt worse was knowing that part of her craved the hurt, craved the humiliation. This is basically she's into BDSM, okay? You gotta think this book was written when the 1950s, no, I think it's in the 1970s, and then it was in the age of 1950. But, being into being spanked and having hot wax and shit dripped on you was, taboo in those days. You don't discuss that type of stuff. So, yeah, she's a sadomasochist. She likes to hurt and be hurt, and so does he. But this comes from a history of fucked up shit. Madam's lover. Hi. Or Madam's lover. Now I'm curious. Interesting. Hot shot, what's going on? Last time pays for all, she thought, and swung. She brought the belt in low, brought it in sidearm, and it whacked across his balls with a brisk yet heavy sound. The sound of a woman striking a rug with a carpet beater. That was all it took. All the fight promptly went out of Tom Rogan. He uttered a thin, strengthless shriek and fell on his knees as if to pray. His hands were between his legs. His head was thrown back. cord stood out from his neck. His mouth was a tragedy grimace of pain. His left knee came down squarely on a heavy, pointed hook of shattered perfume bottle, and he rolled silently over on one side like a whale. One hand left his balls to grab his squirting knee. The blood, she thought. Dear Lord, he's bleeding everywhere. He'll live. This new Beverly. I like new Beverly. Old Beverly's like, oh my God, he's bleeding everywhere. He'll live. Like, bitch, let's go. He'll live, this new Beverly. The Beverly who seemed to have surfaced at Mike Hanlon's phone call replied coldly. Guys like him always live. You just gotta get the hell out of here before he decides he wants to tangle some more. Or before he decides to go down to the cellar and get his Winchester. She backed away and felt pain stab her foot as she stepped on a hunk of glass from the broken vanity mirror. She bent down, grabbed the handle of her suitcase. She never took her eyes off of him. Smart girl. She backed out of the door and she backed down the hall. She was holding the suitcase in front of her in both hands and it banged her shins as she backed. Her cut foot printed bloody heel prints. When she reached the stairs, she turned around and went down quickly, not letting herself think. She suspected she had no coherent thoughts left inside anyway, at least for the time being. She felt a light pawing against her leg and screamed. She looked down and saw it was the end of the belt. It was still wrapped around her hand. In this dim light, it looked more like a dead snake than ever. She threw it over the banister, her face a wince of disgust, and saw it land in an S shape on the rug of the banister of a rug downstairs hallway. At the foot of the stairs, she grabbed the hem of her white lace nightgown, cross-handed, and pulled it over her head. It was bloody, and she would not wear it 1 second longer, no matter what. She tossed it aside, and it billowed into a rubber plant. Onto the rubber plant by the doorway, to the living room in a lacy parachute. Arrogant, what's going on, honey? She bent naked to the suitcase. Her nipples were cold, hard as bullets. Beverly, get your ass upstairs! She gasped, jerked, then bent back to the suitcase. If he was strong enough to scream that loud, her time was a good deal shorter than she thought she had. She opened the suitcase and pulled out panties, a blouse, and an old pair of Levi's. She jerked these on, standing by the door, her eyes never leaving the stairs. But Tom did not appear at the top of them. He bawled her name twice more, and each time she flinched away from that sound, her eyes hunted, her lips pulling back from her teeth in an unconscious snarl. Carrot, what's going on? This is that fight or flight thing. Basically, she's tired of this. She jabbed the buttons of the blouse through the holes as fast as she could. The top two buttons were gone. It was ironic how little of her sewing It was ironic how little of her own sewing ever got done. And she supposed she looked quite a bit like a part-time hooker looking for one last quickie before calling it a night. But it would have to do. I'll kill you, bitch! You fucking bitch! She slammed the suitcase closed and latched it. The arm of her blouse poked out like a tongue. She looked around once quickly, suspecting that she would never see this house again. She discovered only relief in the idea and so opened the door and let herself out. She was 3 blocks away, walking with no clear sense of where she realized her feet were still bare. The one she had cut, the left, throbbed dully. She had to get something on her feet, and it was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. Her wallet and credit cards were at home. She felt in the pockets of jeans and came up with nothing but a few puffs of lint. She didn't have a dime, not so much as a red penny. She looked around the residential building she was in. Nice homes, manicured lawns and plantings, dark windows. And suddenly, she began to laugh. Beverly Rogan sat on a low stone wall, her suitcase between her dirty feet, and laughed. The stars were out, and how bright they were. She tilted her head back and laughed at them. That wild exhilaration washing through her again like a tidal wave that lifted and carried and cleansed, a force so powerful that any conscious thought was lost. Only her blood thought, and its one powerful voice spoke to her in some inarticulate way of desire. Although what it was, it desired she neither knew nor cared. It was either to feel the warm feeling of her existence with this insistence. Okay, Stephen, all right. desire, she thought, and inside her that tidal wave of exhilaration seemed to gather speed, rushing her onward towards some inevitable crash. She laughed at the stars, frightened but free, her terror as sharp as pain and as sweet as a ripe October apple. And when the light came on in the upstairs bedroom of the house this stone wall belonged to, she grabbed the handle of her suitcase and fled off into the night, still laughing. She's nuts. Bill Denbrough takes time out. Leave? Audra repeated. She looked at him puzzled, a bit afraid, and then tucked her bare feet up under her. The floor was cold. The whole cottage was cold. Sweet, sweet, what's going on? The south of England had been experiencing an exceptionally dark spring, and more than once on his regular morning and evening walks, Ben Denbrough had found himself thinking of Maine. Thinking in a surprised, vague way of Derry. The cottage was supposed to have central heating. The ad had said so, and there was certainly a furnace down here in the tidy little basement, tucked away in what had once been a coal bin. But he and Audra had discovered early on in the shoot that the British idea of central heating was not at all the same as the American one. It seemed the Brits believed you had central heating as long as you didn't have to piss away a scrim of ice in the toilet bowl when you got up in the morning. Don't ask me. It was morning now, just 7:45. Bill had hung the phone up 5 minutes ago. Bill, you can't just leave. You know that. I have to, he said. There was a hutch on the far side of the room. He went to it, took a bottle of Glenfiddich. Never heard of that brand. From the top of the shelf and poured himself a drink. Some of it slopped over the side of the glass. Fuck, he muttered. Who was that on the phone? What are you scared of, Bill? I'm not scared. Oh, your hands always shake like that? You always have your first drink before breakfast? He came back to his chair, rope flapping around his ankles, and sat down. He tried to smile, but it was a poor effort and he gave it up. On the telly, the BBC announcer was wrapping up this morning's bad batch of news before going on to last evening's football scores. When they had arrived in a small suburban village of Fleet a month before the shoot was scheduled to begin, they had both marveled over the technical quality of British television. Scott, what's going on? On a good pie color set, it really did look as though you could climb right inside. More lines or something, Bill had said. I don't know what it is, but it's great, Audra replied. That was before they discovered that much of the programming consisted of American shows such as Dallas and endless British sports events ranging from the arcane and boring champion darts throwing, in which all the participants looked like hypertensive sumo wrestlers, to the simply boring British football was bad. Cricket was even worse. I've been thinking about home a lot lately, Bill said and sipped his drink. Home? She said, and looked so honestly puzzled that he laughed. Poor Audra. Married almost 11 years to the guy, and you don't know doodly squat about him. What do you think about that? He laughed again and swallowed the rest of his drink. His laughter had a quality she cared for as little as seeing him with a glass of scotch in his hand at this hour of the morning. The laugh sounded like something that really wanted to be a howl of pain. I wonder if any of the others have got husbands and wives who are just finding out how little they know. I suppose they must. Billy, I know that I love you, she said. For 11 years, that's been enough. I know. He smiled at her. The smile was sweet, tired, and scared. Mummy fan, what's going on? Please tell me what this is about. She looked at him with her lovely gray eyes, sitting there in a tatty lease house chair, with her feet curled beneath the hem of her nightgown. A woman he had loved, married, and still loved. He tried to see through her eyes, to see what she knew. He tried to see it as a story. He could, but he knew it would never sell. Here's a poor boy from the state of Maine who goes to the university on a scholarship. All his life he has wanted to be a writer. But when he enrolls in the writing courses, he finds himself lost without a compass in a strange and frightening land. There's one guy who wants to be Updike. Okay. There's another one who wants to be a New England version of Faulkner. I know Faulkner, so I'm going to have to look up who Updike is. Only he wants to write novels about the grim lives of the poor in blank verse. There's a girl who admires Joyce Carol Oates, but feels that because Oates was nurtured in a sexist society, she is radioactive in a literary sense. Oates is unable to clean, this girl says. She will be a cleaner. There's the fat grad student who can't or won't speak above a mutter. This guy has written a play in which there are 9 characters. Each of them says only a single word. Little by little, the playgoers realize that when you put the single words together, you come out with "War is the tool of the sexist death merchants." This fellow's play receives an A from the man who teaches EH 141, Creative Writing Honor Seminar. This instructor has published 4 books of poetry and his master's thesis, all with the University Press. He smokes pot and wears a peace medallion. The Fat Mutterer's play is produced by a guerrilla theater group during the strike to end the war, which shuts down the campus in May of 1970. The instructor plays one of the characters. Bill Denbrough, however, meanwhile has written one locked room mystery tale, 3 science fiction stories, and several a great deal to Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, and Richard Matheson. Ooh, I need to look him up. Because if he's writing that, Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft are who Stephen King got some of his ideas from. Victoria Red, what's going on? In later years, he would say those stories resembled a mid-1800s funeral hat equipped with a supercharger and painted day glow red. One of the SF tales earns him a B, science fiction tales. This is better, the instructor writes on the title page. In the Alien Counter-Strike, we see the vicious circle in which the violence begets violence. I particularly like the needle-nosed spacecraft as a symbol of social-sexual incursion. While this remains a slightly confused undertone throughout it, it is interesting. All the others do no better than a C. I'm going to assume this is what really happened to Stephen King in school. Finally, he stands up in class one day, after the discussion of a sallow young woman's vignette about a cow's examination of a discarded engine block in a deserted field. This may or may not be after a nuclear war. It has gone on for 70 minutes or so. The sallow girl who smoked one Winston after another, and picks occasionally after the pimples which nestle in the hollows of her temples, insists that the vignette is a socio-political statement in the manner of the early Orwell. Most of the class and the instructor agree, but still the discussion drones on. When Bill stands up, the class looks at him. He is tall and has a certain presence. Speaking carefully, not stuttering. He has not stuttered in better than 5 years. He says, "I don't understand this at all. I don't understand any of this." Shad'Oracle, what's going on, sugar? Why does a story have to be socio anything? Politics, culture, history, aren't those natural ingredients in any story if it's told well? I mean, he looks around, sees hostile eyes, and realizes dimly that they see this as some sort of attack. Maybe it even is. They're thinking, he realizes, that maybe there's a sexist death merchant in their midst. I mean, can't you guys just let a story be a story? No one replies. Silence spins out. He stands there looking from one cool set of eyes to the next. The solo girl chuffs out smoke and snubs her cigarette in the ashtray she has brought along in her backpack. Finally, the instructor says softly, as if to a child having an inexplicable tantrum, "Do you believe William Faulkner was just telling stories? Do you believe Shakespeare was just interested in making a buck? Come now, Bill. Tell us what you think." "I think that's pretty close to the truth," Bill says after a long moment in which he honestly considers the question. And in their eyes, he reads a kind of damnation. "I suggest," the instructor says, toying with his pen and smiling at Bill with half-lit eyes, "that you have a great deal to learn." The applause starts somewhere in the back of the room. Bill leaves, but returns the next week, determined to stick with it. In the time between, he has written a story called The Dark, a tale about a boy who discovers a monster in the cellar of his house. The little boy faces it, battles it, finally kills it. He feels a kind of holy exultation as he goes about the business of writing this story. He even feels that he is not so much telling the story as he is allowing the story to flow through him. Fire Rose, what's going on, sugar? At one point, he puts his pen down and takes his hot and aching hand out into 10-degree December cold, where it nearly smokes from the temperature change. He walks around, green cut-off boots squeaking in the snow, like tiny shutter hinges which needed oil, and his head seems to bulge with the story. It's a little scary, the way it needs to get out. He feels that if it cannot escape by the way of his racing hand, that it will pop out of his eyes in its urgency to escape and be concrete. "Going to knock the shit out of it," he confides to the blowing winter dark and laughs a little, a shaky laugh. Dot or period, what's going on? McAtoy, welcome. He is aware that he has finally discovered how to do just that. After 10 years of trying, he has suddenly found the starter button on the vast dead bulldozer, taking up so much space in his head. It started up. It is revving. It is nothing pretty, this big machine. It was not made for taking pretty girls to proms. It is not a status symbol. It means business. It can knock things down. If he isn't careful, it will knock him down. He rushes inside and finishes The Dark at white heat, writing until 4 in the morning, and finally falling asleep over his ring binder. If someone had suggested to him that he was really writing about his brother George, he would have been surprised. He has not thought about George in years, or so he honestly believes. The story comes back from the instructor with an F slashed into the title page. 2 words scrawled beneath in capital letters. "Pulp," screams one. "Crap," screams the other. Bill takes the 15-page sheaf of manuscript over to the wood stove and opens the door. He is within an inch of tossing it in when the absurdity of what he's doing strikes him. He sits down in his rocking chair, looks at a Grateful Dead poster, and starts to laugh. "Pulp? Fine, let it be pulp. The woods were full of it." "Let them fucking trees fall," Bill exclaims, and laughs until tears spurt from his eyes and roll down his face. He retypes the title page, the one with the instructor's judgment on it, and sends it off to a men's magazine named White Tie. Although from what Bill can see, it really should be titled "Naked Girls Who Look Like Drug Users." Yet his battered writer's market says they buy horror stories, and the 2 issues he has brought down at the local mom and pop store have indeed contained 4 horror stories sandwiched between the naked girls and the ads for dirty movies and potency pills. One of them, by a man named Dennis Etchison, is actually quite good. He sends the dark off with no real hopes. He has submitted a good many stories to magazines before with nothing to show for it but rejection slips. And is flabbergasted and delighted when the fiction editor of White Tide buys it for $200. Payment on publication. The assistant editor adds a short note which calls it the best damn horror story since Ravery's The Jar. He adds, too bad only about 70 people coast to coast will read it. But Bill Denbrough does not care. $200? He goes to his advisor with a drop card for EH 141. His advisor initials it. Bill Denbrough staples the drop card to the assistant fiction editor's congratulatory note and tacks both to the bulletin board on the creative writing instructor's door. Bill is petty as shit. Basically, that story that the instructor gave him an F on, he sent it into a paper. They bought it for $200. Bill goes back to his school, drops the class, because back in that day you had to get an actual slip and have the advisor initial it. Then goes to the fucking teacher with the fucking slip and the paper and the fucking letter saying that the people bought it and that how great they thought it was, and sticks that shit to the door and walks off. Well, no, what's going on? Okay. In the corner of the bulletin board, he sees an anti-war cartoon. And suddenly, as if moving on his own accord, his fingers pluck his pen from his breast pocket, and across the cartoon he writes, if fiction and politics ever really do become interchangeable, I'm going to kill myself. Because I won't know what else to do. You see, politics change. Stories never do. He pauses and then, feeling a bit small but unable to help himself, he adds, I suggest you have a lot to learn. His drop card comes back to him in the campus mail 3 days later. The instructor has initialed it. On the space marked grade at time of drop, the instructor has not given him an incomplete or the low C to which his run of grades at the time would have entitled him. Instead, another F is slashed angrily across the grade line. Below it, the instructor has written, do you think money proves anything about anything, Denbrough? Ooh, honey, this is some petty shit here. Well, actually, yes, Bill Denbrough says to the empty apartment. Once more, begins to laugh crazily. In his senior year of college, he dares to write a novel because he has no idea what he's getting into. He escapes the experience, scratched and frightened, but alive, and with a manuscript nearly 500 pages long. He sends it out to the Viking press. Lucky Charm was going on, knowing that it would be the first of many stops for his book, which is about ghosts. But he liked Viking ship's logo. Life with Dash was going on. And that makes it a good place as any. As it turns out, the first stop is also the last stop. Viking purchases the book, and for Bill Denbrough, the fairy tale begins. The man who was once known as Stuttering Bill has become a success at the age of 23. 3 years later, and 3,000 miles from northern New England, he attains a queer kind of celebrity by marrying a woman who is a movie star, and 5 years his senior at Hollywood's Church in the Pines. The gossip columnists give it 7 months. The only bet, they say, is whether the end will come in a divorce or an annulment. Friends and enemies on both sides of the match feel about the same. Pikachu, what's going on? Pikachu with melanin? What's going on, honey? The age difference apart, I mean, Pikachu with melanin, so like black Pikachu, brown Pikachu. I like it. The age difference apart, the disparities are startling. He is tall, already balding, already inclining a bit toward fat. Why is it that... This is why I like reading the book. In the movies, they make all these characters sexy as hell. And all the guys are supposed to be balding, or fat. He speaks slowly in company and at times seems nearly inarticulate. Joe, what's going on? Audra, on the other hand, is auburn haired, statuesque, and gorgeous. She is less like an earthly woman than a creature from some semi divine super race. He has been hired to do the screenplay of his second novel, The Black Rapids, mostly because the right to do at least the first draft of the screenplay was an immutable condition of sale, in spite of his agent's moans that he was insane. And his draft has actually turned out pretty well. He has been invited to the Universal City for further rewrites and production meetings. His agent is a small woman named Susan Brown. She is exactly 5 feet tall. She is violently energetic and even more violently empathetic. I always say emphatic. You know, if she was an empath, that would make it better. Positive vibes. What's going on, sugar? Welcome. Thanks for being a fan. By all means, y'all ask your questions. Don't do it, Billy, she tells him. Kiss it off. They got a lot of money tied up in it, and they'll get someone good to do the screenplay. Maybe even Goldman. Who? William Goldman, the only good writer who ever went out there and did both. Thank you, Positive. What are you talking about, Suze? He stayed there, and he stayed good, she said. The odds on both are like the odds on beating lung cancer. It can be done, but who wants to try? You burn out on sex and booze, or some of the nifty new drugs. Susan's crazily fascinating brown eyes sparkle vehemently up at him. And if it turns out to be some meatball who gets the assignment instead of someone like Goldman, so what? The book's on the shelf there. They can't change a word. Susan, listen to me, Billy. Take the money and run. You're young and strong. That's what they like. You go out there and they will first separate you from your self-respect and then from your ability to write a straight line from point A to point B. Last but not least, they will take your testes. You write like a grown-up, but you're just a kid with a very high forehead. I have to go. Did someone just fart in here? She returns. Must have, because something sure stinks. But I do. I have to. Jesus, I have to get away from New England. Odell, what's going on? He was afraid to say what comes next. It's like mouthing a curse, but he owes it to her. I have to get away from Maine. Why, for God's sake? I don't know. I just do. Are you telling me something real, Billy, or just talking like a writer? It's real. They're in bed together during this conversation. Her breasts are small like peaches, sweet like peaches. He loves her a lot, although not the way they both know would be a really good way to love. She sits up with a pool of sheet in her lap and lights a cigarette. She's crying, but he doubts if she knows he knows. It's just this shine in her eyes. It would be tactful not to mention it, so he doesn't. He doesn't love her in that really good way, but he cares a mountain for her. Go on then, she says in a dry business-like voice as she turns her back on him. Give me a call when you're ready, and if you still have the strength, I'll come and pick up the pieces if there are any left. The film version of Black Rapids is called Pitch of the Black Demon, and Audra Phillips is cast as the lead. The title is horrible, but the movie turns out to be quite good. And the only part of him he loses in Hollywood is his heart. Bill, Audra said, again, bringing him out of these memories. He saw she had snapped off the TV. He glanced out the window and saw fog nuzzling against the panes. I'll explain as much as I can, he said. You deserve that. But first, do 2 things for me. All right? Fix yourself another cup of tea and tell me what you know about me, or what you think you know. She looked at him puzzled and then went to the highboy. I know you're from Maine, she said, making herself tea from the breakfast pot. She was not British, but just a touch of clipped British had crept into her voice. I can't make this out. Bellardo, I think. What's going on? Um, but a touch of clip British had crept into her voice, a holdover from the part she played in Attic Room, the movie they had come over here to do. It was Bill's first original screenplay. He had been offered the directorial shoot as well. Thank God he had declined that. His leaving now would have completed the job of bitching things up. He knew what they would all say, the whole crew. Billy Denbrough finally shows his true colors, just another fucking writer, crazier than a shithouse rat. God knew he felt crazy right about now. I know you had a brother, and that you loved him very much, and that he died, Audra went on. I know that you grew up in a town called Derry, moved to Bangor about 2 years after your brother died, and moved to Portland when you were 14. I know your dad died of lung cancer when you were 17, and you wrote a bestseller when you were still in college, paying your way with a scholarship and a part time job in a textile mill. That must have seemed very strange to you, the change in income and prospects. She returned to his side of the room, and he saw it in her face then, the realization of the hidden spaces between them. I know that you wrote The Black Rapids a year later and came out to Hollywood. And the week before shooting started on the movie, you met a very mixed up woman named Audra Phillips, who knew a little bit about you, about what you must have been through. The crazy decompression. Because she had been plain old Audrey Philpott 5 years before. And this woman was drowning. Audra, don't. Her eyes were steady, holding his. Oh, why not? Let us tell the truth and shame the devil. I was drowning. I discovered poppers 2 years before I met you. And then a year later, I discovered Coke, and that was even better. A popper in the morning, Coke in the afternoon, wine at night, a Valium at bedtime. Audra's vitamins. Well, they're British, so she's like, Audra's vitamins. Too many important interviews, too many good parts. I was so much like a character in the Jacqueline Susan novel, it was hilarious. Do you know how I think about that time now, Bill? No. She sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving his, and grinned. It was like running on the walkway at LA International. You get it? Not exactly, no. It's a moving belt, she said, about a quarter-mile long. I know the walkway, he said, but I don't see what you're... You just stand there, and it carries you all the way to the baggage claim area. But if you want, you don't have to just stand there. You can walk on it, or run. And it seems like you're just doing your normal walk, or your normal jog, or your normal run, or your normal all-out sprint, whatever. Because your body forgets that what you're really doing is topping the speed the walkway's already making. That's why they have those signs that say, slow down, moving rampway, near the end. When I met you, I felt as if I'd run right off the end of that thing onto the floor that didn't move anymore. There I was, my body 9 miles ahead of my feet. You can't keep up your balance. Sooner or later, you fall right on your face, except I didn't, because you caught me. She put her tea aside and lit a cigarette, her eyes never leaving him. He could only see that her hands were shaking in the minute jitter of the lighter flame, which darted first to the right of the cigarette end and then to the left before finding it. She drew deep, blew out a fast jet of smoke. What do I know about you? I know you seem to have it all under control. I know that. You never seem to be in a hurry to get to the next drink, or the next meeting, or the next party. You seem confident that all those things would be there if you wanted them. You talked slow. Part of it was the main drawl, I guess, but most of it was just you. I had to slow down to listen. I looked at you, Bill, and I saw someone who never ran on the walkway because he knew it would get him there. Goddess, what's going on? You seemed utterly untouched by the hype and hysteria. You didn't Lisa Rose, so you could drive down Rodale Drive. AJ, what's going on? Or Al, what's going on? On Saturday afternoon with your own vanity plates on some glitzy rental company's car. You didn't have a press agent to plant items in Variety or the Hollywood Reporter. You'd never done the Carson show. Writers can't unless they do card tricks or bend spoons, he said, smiling. It's not, it's like a national law. He thought she would smile, but she didn't. Perk, what's going on? I know you were there when I needed you. When I came flying off the end of the walkway like O.J. Simpson in that old Hertz ad. Maybe you saved me from eating the wrong pill on top of too much booze. Or maybe I would have made it out on the other side on my own. And it's all a big dramatization on my part. But it doesn't feel like that. Not inside where I am. She snuffed the cigarette, only 2 puffs gone. I know you've been there ever since. And I've been there for you. We're good in bed. That used to seem like a big deal to me. But we're also good out of it. And now that seems like a bigger deal. I feel as if I could grow old with you and still be brave. I know you drink too much beer and don't get enough exercise. I know that some nights you dream badly. He was startled, nastily startled, almost frightened. I never dream. She smiled. So you tell the interviewers when they ask you where you get your ideas. But it's not true. Unless it's just indigestion when you start groaning in the night. And I don't believe that, Billy. Do I talk? He asked cautiously. He could remember no dreams. No dreams at all, good or bad. Audra nodded. Sometimes. But I can never make out what it is you say. And on a couple of occasions, you have wept. He looked at her blankly. There was a bad taste in his mouth. It trailed back along his tongue and down his throat with the taste of melted aspirin. What are you doing? So now you know how fear tastes, he thought. Time you found out, considering all you've written on the subject. He supposed it was a taste he would get used to, if he lived long enough. Memories were suddenly trying to crowd in. It was as if a black sack in his mind were bulging, threatening to spew noxious dreams. Images up from his subconscious and into the mental field of vision, commanded by his rational waking mind. And if that happened all at once, it would drive him mad. He tried to push them back and succeeded, but not before he heard a voice. It was as if someone buried alive had cried out from the ground. It was Eddie Casbrack's voice. You saved my life, Bill. Those big boys, they drive me bug shit. Sometimes I think they really want to kill me. Your arms, Audra said. Bill looked down at them. The flesh there had humped into goose flesh. Not little bumps, but huge white knobs like insect eggs. They both stared, saying nothing, as if looking at something, looking at an interesting museum exhibit. Messina, what's going on? The goosebumps slowly melted away. Would y'all stop? Um, in the silence that followed, Audra said, and I know one other thing. Someone called you this morning from the States and said you have to leave me. He got up, looked briefly at the liquor bottles, then went into the kitchen and came back with a glass of orange juice. He said, you know I had a brother, and you know he died. But you don't know he was murdered. Audra took a quick snatch of breath. Murdered? Oh, Bill, why didn't you ever tell you? He laughed at that Parkinson. I don't know. What happened? We were living in Derry then. There had been a flood, but it was mostly over, and George was bored. I was sick in bed with the flu. He wanted me to make him a boat out of a sheet of newspaper. I knew Hal from day camp the year before. He said he was going to sail it down the gutters on Witcham Street and Jackson Street because they were still full of water. So I made him the boat, and he thanked me, and he went out, and that was the last time I ever saw my brother George alive. If I hadn't had the flu, maybe I could have saved him. He paused, right palm rubbing at his left cheek, as if testing for beard stubble. His eyes, magnified by the lenses of his glasses, looked thoughtful, but he was not looking at her. It happened right there on Witcham Street, not too far from the intersection with Jackson. Whoever killed him pulled his left arm out. Whoever killed him pulled his left arm out off the way a second grader would pull a wing off of a fly. Medical examiner said he died of shock or blood. He either died of shock or blood loss. Far as I could ever see, it didn't make a dime's worth of difference, which it was. Christ, Bill! I imagine you wonder why I never told you. The truth is, I wonder myself. Here we've been married 11 years, and until never knew what happened to Georgie. I know about your whole family, even your aunts and uncles. I know your grandfather died in his garage in Iowa City, frigging around with his chainsaw when he was drunk. I know those things because married people, no matter how busy they are, get to know almost everything after a while. And if they get really bored and stop listening, they pick it up anyway, by osmosis. Or do you think I'm wrong? No, he said frankly. You're not wrong, Bill. And we've always been able to talk to each other, haven't we? I mean, neither of us got so bored it ever had to be osmosis, right? Well, she says, until today I always thought so. Come on, Audra. You know everything that's happened to me over the last 11 years of my life. Every deal, every idea, every cold, every friend, every guy that ever did me wrong or tried to. You know I slept with Susan Brown. You know that sometimes I get maudlin when I drink and play the records too loud. Love it. Love it. Oh, this man's vocabulary. Especially the Grateful Dead, she said, and he laughed. This time she laughed back. You know the most important stuff, too. The things I hope for. Yes, I thought so, but this... She paused, shook her head for a moment. How much does this call have to do with your brother, Bill? Let me get to it in my own way. Don't try to rush me into the center of it, or you'll have me committed. It's so big and so quaintly awful that I'm trying to sort of creep up on it. You see, it never occurred to me to tell you about Georgie. She looked at him, frowned, shook her head faintly. I don't understand. What I'm trying to tell you, Audra, is that I haven't even thought of Georgie in 20 years or more. But you told me that you had a brother named... I repeated a fact. He said, that was all. His name was a word. It cast no shadow at all in my mind. But I think maybe it cast a shadow of your dreams, Audra said. Her voice was very quiet. The groaning, the crying. She nodded. I suppose you could be right, he said. In fact, you're almost surely right. But dreams you don't remember don't really count, do they? Are you really telling me you never thought of him at all? Yes, I am. She shook her head, frankly disbelieving. Not even the horrible way he died. Not until today, Audra. She looked at him and shook her head again. You asked me before we were married if I had any brothers or sisters. And I said I had a brother who died when I was a kid. You knew my parents were gone. And you've gotten so much family that it took up your entire field of attention. But that's not all. What do you mean? It isn't just George that's been a black hole. I haven't thought of Derry itself in 20 years. Not the people I chummed with, Eddie Kasprak, and Richie the Mouth, Stan Uris, Bev Marsh. He ran his hands through his hair and laughed shakily. It's like having a case of amnesia so bad you don't know you've got it. And when Mike Hanlon called, who's Mike Hanlon? Another kid that we chummed with. That I before she died. Of course, he's no kid anymore. None of us are. That was Mike on the phone. Transatlantic cable. He said, hello? Have I reached the Denbrough residence? And I said, yes. And he said, Bill, is that you? And I said, yes. And he said, this is Mike Hanlon. It meant nothing to me, Audra. He might as well have been selling encyclopedias or Burl Ives records. Then he said, from Derry. And when he said that, it was like a door opened inside me and some horrible light shined out. And I remembered who he was. I remembered Georgie. I remember all the others. All this happened, Bill snapped his fingers. Like that. And I knew he was going to ask me to come. Come back to Derry. Yeah, he took his glasses off, rubbed his eyes, looked at her. Never in her life had she seen a man who looked so frightened. Back to Derry, because we promised, he said. And we did. We did. All of us. Us kids. We stood in that creek that ran through the barrens. And we held hands in a circle. And we had cut our palms with a piece of glass, so it was like a bunch of kids playing Blood Brothers. Only it was real. He held his palms out to her, and in the center of each, she could see a close-set ladder of white lines that could have been scar tissue. Savage, welcome, sugar. By all means, ask your questions. She had held his hands, both his hands, countless times, but she had never noticed these scars across his palm before. They were faint, yes, but she would have believed. And the party, that party, not the one where they had met, although this second one formed a perfect bookend to that first one, because it was the rap party at the end of the pit of the Black Demon shoot. It had been loud and drunk, every inch the Topanga Canyon do. Perhaps a little less bitchy than some of the other LA parties she had been to, because the shoot had gone better than they had any right to expect, and they all knew it. For Audra, it had gone even better, because she had fallen in love with William Denbrough. What was the name of the self-proclaimed palmist? She couldn't remember now, only that she had been one of the makeup man's 2 assistants. She remembered the girl wiping off her blouse at some point in the party, revealing a very filmy bra beneath, and tying it over her head like a gypsy scarf. High on pot and wine, she had red palms for the rest of the evening, or at least until she passed out. Audra could not remember now if the girl's readings had been good or bad, witty or stupid. She had been pretty high herself that night. What she did remember was that at one point the girl had grabbed Bill's palm and her own and had declared them perfectly matched. They were life twins, she said. She could remember watching, more than a little jealous, as the girl traced the lines on his palm with her exquisitely lacquered fingernail. How stupid was that? In the weird LA film subculture, where men patted women's fannies as routinely as New York men pecked their cheeks. But there had been something intimate and lingering about that tracery. There had been no little white scars on Bill's palms then. She had been stop, child. She had been watching the charade with a jealous lover's eye, and she was sure of the memory, sure of the fact. She said so to Bill now. He nodded. You're right. They weren't there then. And although I can't absolutely swear to it, I don't think they were there last night, down at the Plow and Barrow. Ralph and I were hand wrestling for beers again, and I think I would have noticed. He grinned at her. The grin was dry, humorless, and scared. I think they came back when Mike Hanlon called. That's what I think. Bill, that isn't possible. But she reached for her cigarettes. Bill was looking at his hands. Stan did it, he said. Cut our palms with a sliver of Coke bottle. I can remember it so clearly now. He looked up at Audra, and behind the glasses, his eyes were hurt and puzzled. I remember how that piece of glass flashed in the sun. It was one of the new clear ones. Before that, Coke bottles used to be green. Remember that? She shook her head, but he didn't see her. He was still studying his palms. I can remember Stan doing his own hands last, pretending he was going to slash his wrists instead of just cut the palms a little. Foreshadow, or late Shad'O, because we already know Stan has slashed his wrist. Um, I guess it was just some goof, but I almost made a move on him to stop him because for a second or two there, he looked serious. Bill, don't, she said in a low voice. This time she had to steady the light in her right hand by grasping it with her left in her wrist and her left, like a policeman holding a gun in a shooting range. Scars can't come back. They either are or aren't. You saw them before, huh? Is that what you're telling me? They're very faint, Audra said, more shocked than she had intended. We were all bleeding, he said. We were standing there in the water not far from where Eddie Casbrack and Ben Hanscom and I built the dam that time. You don't mean the architect, do you? Is there one by that name? God, Bill, he built the new BBC Communications Center. They're still arguing whether it's a dream or an abortion. Well, I don't know if he's the same guy or not. It doesn't seem likely, but I guess it could be. The Ben I knew was great at building stuff. We all stood there, and I was holding Bev Marsh's left hand in my right and Richie Tozier's right hand in my left. We stood out there in the water like something out of a southern baptism after a tent meeting. And I remember I could see the dairy standpipe on the horizon. It looked as white as you could imagine the robes of the archangels must be. Mike, what's going on? And we promised, we swore, that if it wasn't over, that if it ever started to happen again, we'd go back. And we'd do it again and stop it forever. Stop what? She cried, suddenly furious with him. Stop what? What the fuck are you talking about? I wish you wouldn't ask, Bill began and then stopped. She saw an expression of bemused horror spread over his face like a stain. Give me a cigarette. She passed him the pack. He lit one. She had never seen him smoke a cigarette. I used to stutter too. You stuttered? Yes. Back then. You said I was the only man in LA you ever knew who dared to speak slowly. The truth is, I didn't dare talk fast. It wasn't reflection. It wasn't deliberation. It wasn't wisdom. All reformed stutterers speak very slowly. It's one of the tricks you learn, like thinking of your middle name just before you introducing yourself. Virgo, what's going on? Because stutterers have more trouble with nouns than with any other words. And the one word in all the world that gives them the most trouble is their own first name. Stuttered. She smiled a smile, as if he had told a joke and she had missed the point. Until Georgie died, I stuttered moderately, Bill said, and had already begun to hear words double in his mind, as if they were infinitesimally separated in time. The words came out smoothly in his ordinary slow and cadenced way, but in his mind he heard words like Georgie and moderately overlap, becoming Georgie and moderately. I mean, I had some really bad moments, usually when I was called on in class, and especially if I knew the answer especially if I knew the answer and wanted to give it. But mostly I got by. After George died, it got a lot worse. Then around the age of 14 or 15, things started to get better again. I went to Cheverus High School in Portland, and there was a speech therapist there, Mrs. Thomas, who was really great. She taught me some good tricks, like thinking of my middle name just before I said, "Hi, I'm Bill Denbrough," out loud. I was taking French 1, and she taught me to switch to French if I got badly stuck on a word. So if you're standing there feeling like the world's grandest asshole saying this over and over like a broken record, you switched over to French and said, "C'est le vieux." And it would come flowing off your tongue. Worked every time. And as soon as you said it in French, you could come back to English and say this book with no problem at all. If you got stuck on an S word like ship or skate or slum, you could lisp it. Fit, fake, the fit, skate, Phlegm, no stutter. All of that helped, but mostly it was just forgetting Derry and everything that happened there. Because that's when the forgetting happened. When we were living in Portland and I was going to Chever's. I didn't forget everything at once, but looking back now, I'd have to say it happened over a remarkably short period of time. Maybe no more than 4 months. My stutter and my memories faded out together. Gemini, what's going on? Someone washed the blackboard and all the old equations went away. He drank what was left of the juice. When I stuttered on ask a few seconds ago, that was the first time in maybe 21 years. He looked at her. First the scars, then the stutter. Do you hear it? You're doing that on purpose, she said, badly frightened. No. I guess there's no way to convince a person of that, but it's true. Stuttering's funny, Audra. Spooky. On what level? You're not even aware it's happening. But it's also something you can hear in your mind. It's like part of your head is working in an instant instead of ahead of the rest. Or one of those reverb systems kids used to put in their jalopies back in the 50s. When the sound in the rear speaker would come just a split second after the sound in the front speaker. He got up and walked restlessly around the room. He looked tired, and she thought with some unease of how hard he had worked over the last 13 years or so, as if it might be possible to justify the moderateness of his talent by working furiously, almost nonstop. She found herself having a very uneasy thought and tried to push it away, but it wouldn't go. Suppose Bill's call had really been from Ralph Foster, inviting him down to the Plow and Barrel for an hour of arm wrestling, or backgammon. Okay. I was like, what the hell is all this? Or maybe from Freddie Firestone, the producer of Attic Room, or on some problem or other. Perhaps even a wrong ring, as the vetty British doctor's wife down the lane put it. What did such thoughts lead to? Why, to the idea that all this dairy, Mike Hanley business was nothing more but than a hallucination. A hallucination brought on by an incipient nervous breakdown. But the scars, Audra. How do you explain the scars? He's right. They weren't there. And now they are. That's the truth. And you know it. Tell me the rest, she said. Who killed your brother George? What did you and these other children do? What did you promise? He went to her, knelt before her like an old-fashioned suitor about to propose marriage, and took her hands. I think I could tell you, he said softly. I think that if I really wanted to, I could. Most of it I don't remember even now, but once I started talking, it would come. I can sense those memories, waiting to be born. They're like clouds filled with rain, only this rain would be very dirty. The plants that grew after rain like that would be monsters. Maybe I can face that with the others. Do they know? Mike said he called them all. He thinks they'll all come, except maybe for Stan. He said Stan sounded strange. It all sounds strange to me. You're frightening me very badly, Bill. I'm sorry, he said, and kissed her. It was like getting a kiss from an utter stranger. She found herself hating this man, Mike Hanley. I thought I ought to explain as much as I could. I thought that would be better than just creeping off into the night. I suppose some of them may do just that. But I have to go. And I think Stan would be there no matter how strange he sounded. Or maybe that's just because I can't imagine not going myself. Because of your brother. Bill shook his head slowly. I could tell you that, but it would be a lie. I loved him. I know how strange that must sound after telling you I haven't thought of him in over 20 years or so, but I loved the hell out of that kid. He smiled a little. He was a spasmoid, but I loved him. You know? Audra, who had a younger sister, nodded. I know. But it isn't George. I can't explain what it is. He looked out the window at the morning fog. I feel like a bird must feel when it falls when fall comes, and it knows somehow it just knows it has to fly home. It's instinct, babe. And I believe it's instinct. I believe instinct's the iron skeleton under all our ideals of free will. Noah, what's going on? Unless you're willing to take the pipe, or eat the gun, or take a long walk off a short dock, you can't say no to some things. You can't refuse to pick up your option because there is no option. You can't stop it from happening any more than you could stand at home plate with a bat in your hand and let a fastball hit you. I have to go. That promise, it's in my mind like a fish hook. She stood up and walked herself carefully to him. She felt very fragile, as if she might break. She put a hand on his shoulder and turned him to her. Take me with you then. The expression of horror that dawned on his face then, not of horror of her, but for her, was so naked that she stepped back, really afraid for the first time. No, he said. Don't think of that, Audra. Don't you ever think of that. You're not going within 3,000 miles of Derry. I think Derry is going to be a very bad place to be during the next couple of weeks. You're going to stay here and carry on and make all the excuses for me you have to. Now promise me that. Should I promise? She asked, her eyes never leaving his. Should I, Bill? Audra, should I? You made a promise and look what that's gotten into you. Or look what that's gotten you into. And me as well, since I'm your wife and I love you. His big hands tightened painfully on her shoulders. Promise me. Promise me. And she could not stand that. That broken word caught in his mouth like a gasped and wrangling fish. I promise, okay? I promise. She burst into tears. Are you happy now? Jesus, you're crazy. This whole thing is crazy. But I promise. He put an arm around her and led her to the couch. Brought her a little brandy. She sipped at it, getting herself under control a little at the time. When do you go then? Today, he said. Concord. I can just make it if I drive to Heathrow instead of taking the train. Freddie wanted me on set after lunch. You go on ahead at 9, and you don't know anything, you see? She nodded reluctantly. I'll be in New York before anything shows up funny, and in Derry before sundown, with the right connections. And when do I see you again? She asked softly. He put an arm around her and held her tightly, but he never answered her question. And now you go to the interlude. But I have made my 2 hours today. So, anyone have any questions? Which I don't think, because I'm pretty sure most of those people in there are robots. Get down. So I'm just gonna assume that because you guys on Big O now see that I have prices up, that y'all are not gonna be asking questions. So yeah. Mm. D, what's going on? Hmm. Okay, well, guess I'll see y'all tomorrow. We thank you for joining us in the Shadow Gallery. The lights are out, the doors are closing. The Hellpaw will graciously and gratefully escort you on out the door. Please do not trip on your way out. They do not care. They will catch you out like a bag of bones or runes. If you would like to book your private session, purchase your live pool, donate to the show, you may do so at my website, www.MadamShadO.com. No W in Shad'O. If you put a W in Shad'O, I'm not supposed to where you go, we end up. Love me, like me, share me, subscribe to me, turn notifications on so you know when I go live. Of course, join me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, Twitter, Big O. If you're on Big O, wear my tag loudly and proudly. All I can tell y'all is the price list is there. It is for people who would like to guarantee that they get read during live. So it is not surprising to me that once a price list went up there that you guys suddenly went very quiet. I am what's going on. I still read people for free. However, those who pay for their readings get pushed to the head of the line. It's just all it is. This is a business, not a charity. Understood, understood, understood. Great. So, I will see y'all tomorrow. And if the habit keeps up, I have no problem not doing this on Big O anymore. It's not a big issue to me. So I'm just going to go ahead and say this. If because you see that I have a price list up, which I have always had a price list, which I always tell you guys about, if the reason that you guys are not asking questions now is because you now see the price list, that is your loss. If that's what changes, because it's funny how many questions you had prior to that, I told you I'm still doing free readings. But the price list is there for those who want to guarantee that they are read. And for those that want to monopolize the actual time on here and take away from everyone else. Because when everyone is asking, like if one person is asking a question and gets read and they keep asking back to back to back and holding up the line and I can't see anyone else's questions but that person, this is how we mitigate that. If someone wanted to call in, they have 5 minutes. This is how we mitigate that. This is how I keep it fair for everyone. But again, I don't know what it is on Big O. Yeah, I would rather spend 7 to pay 5. I don't understand it. But that's y'all business. Apparently, y'all got money like that. Y'all got pockets that deep. So, by all means, go ahead if you want. Send treasure, send gems, send birds, flies, mosquitoes, whatever the fuck it is on Big O. By all means, send what you want to. It does not guarantee I will read you. If I see you, I read you. But if someone pays for it and it comes in, they go first. So there's not gonna be any, oh, I was here first, and oh, I like you didn't do my reading, you skipped over me and went to this person because they paid for it. So y'all have fun. Any energetic beings that are here not welcome be here, not assigned to be here, and not supposed to be here, you do not have to go home, but you do have to get the hell out of here. Y'all have the day you deserve.